Sabbath. Probably the longest Sabbath of my life, ever. And also, strangely, one of the most peaceful. My body would not accept sleep last night, so I kept reviewing every moment of Friday, frantic at times, hoping I could find something I could have done, should have done, so that Jesus, the Messiah, would still be alive. But I found nothing for which to feel guilty, and yet much for which to feel sad. I should have stood up earlier. I should have let the entire Sanhedrin know how I really felt about Jesus. Yet, even though I wish that I could have spoken forcibly long ago, I know that any speaking I would have done would simply have sealed my own fate without affecting his. Something about his death felt foreordained, almost expected and unavoidable. I pulled out many of the scrolls last night and read most of Jeremiah, several of the Psalms, and all of Isaiah by the light of my candles. He had often referred to these prophecies. Many times it seemed as if he believed they had actually been written about him, personally, by name. I found the Messianic prophecies again last night and read them to myself. All of them, again and again and again. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, rejected, oppressed, afflicted. Yet he opened not his mouth. I can count all of my bones. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. And then I went back and I reviewed all of my own notes, my careful recounting of what I had heard about Jesus, what he'd said about himself, and what others, both friends and enemies, have said about him. As I read, I was struck by three things. Jesus spoke often of how the Messiah would experience pain, persecution, and even death. But whenever he spoke of the pain and death, he always spoke of resurrection. Jesus was not afraid of death. In fact, he promised to face it with calm silence, like a sheep before its shearers. Several times he said that he had the power to rise again if someone killed him. Everyone laughed when he said that. I didn't laugh last night. Because the third thing I noticed is that Jesus clearly said he would take up his life again on the third day. Early this morning, I received a message from one of my friends. The high priests have demanded that Pilate place 100 Roman soldiers in front of Joseph's tomb, ban the stone door, and seal it with the hand of Caesar. Seems like the high priest may have been reading the same scriptures I did last night. I was excited by the discovery, desperate to run to the disciples and tell them what I'd learned, to see if they were still in mourning, or maybe to join them in celebrating a resurrection. But I could not go. The disciples did not yet know that I had purchased embalming spices for the body. They did not know me as a believing friend. They knew me as a Pharisee, a member of the Sanhedrin, a wealthy ruler who asked many questions but did not openly follow their master. If I tried to talk to them now, they would assume that I was coming as a spy for the priests, one who could not be trusted. They would not let me in. They would not listen. So I stayed home, safe from old enemies and new friends. And I spent all day thinking about Jesus. Possibly, I was preparing to celebrate a resurrection. Another Messiah. Caiaphas had told me as we walked in the temple about 3 years ago. This one comes from Nazareth of all places. Though, of course, they say he was born in Bethlehem, like all Messiahs are born in Bethlehem. I wonder if a real Messiah will ever come. And Caiaphas traipsed off toward his quarters. I checked out all the Messiahs. The ones who came with swords, the ones who came as thieves, the pietists and the preachers, the anti-Roman nationalists. I followed them all, one by one, hoping I would find a real Messiah. But each time, it became obvious that this one too was a fraud, fake, a charlatan. There were a few who actually believed, I am the promised one. But most just pretended, for the fame or for the money. None had come from Nazareth. I found him in Gethsemane, in the garden that has been taken over by the homeless rabble of our day. He and a score or more of his followers, disciples he called them, were camped near one of the stone barriers, one that offered safe shelter for fires. One has to be warm, and so does the food, they laugh. My questions had been carefully crafted to match the record this Christ had made so far in his messianic career. Water to wine, blind given sight, broken hands straightened, demons dispersed. Most of them were medical miracles that could be staged, though some of the stories blended a bit with the impossible. I wondered if some of the miracles might actually be true. John, a disciple with the rough hands and dress of a Galilean fisherman, introduced us. Nicodemus, he said, from the Sanhedrin. Jesus stood, and I spoke. My carefully prepared questions. Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. I paused for a breath, and he interrupted, speaking calmly as if I had said nothing at all. Very truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. The ensuing argument lasted many minutes. Nicodemus accusing Jesus of not knowing how births take place, and Jesus speaking to me about birthing by water and birthing by wind. None of it made any sense at all. This Messiah was not just a fraud, he was crazy. I stopped him, right in the midst of all of his crazy explanation about wind. Sir, I asked, why are you here? And then he turned my life upside down. Nick, the Messiah reached out and placed his carpenter's hand on my shoulder. My Father loves you so much that he sent me down here to find you, to answer your questions, to hold you close, to bring you home, so that rather than dying down here, you can live with us in our home forever. I came to bring you home. He said it seriously, as if recalling a special memory with his dad, a moment that was now being fulfilled in the homeless camp in the garden. I stammered something unintelligible, took a few more notes, and then rushed back to the safety of my Jerusalem home. Trembling, I was, with a strange mixture of shame for having asked stupid questions and awe at the answers I got without asking for them. I was often in the crowds who followed him after that, watching from a distance, listening, hearing, checking with people who'd been healed, talking to the woman whose son had been raised from the dead, One day, he was beside a small, unwalled village where scores of peasants were begging him to perform healings. Suddenly, an older woman towed an even older man toward him through the crowd. Jesus noticed that the man was blind, held up his hand to keep everyone at a distance, and then took the man off to a more private place. I watched, close as I could get. Jesus spit directly into the man's eyes. Now, the saliva of a holy one is powerful medicine. And if applied directly, that would be the greatest powerful medicine around. But when Jesus asked the man if he could see, the man responded like he was confused. And then he said, well, yeah, I think so, but everyone looks like they're trees walking around. And that got all of us, including Jesus and the old half-blind man, laughing so hard that we cried. After a few moments, Jesus reached out to the man and then raised his hands and prayed for God to bless so that the man would receive full sight. Just like that, everything changed. The man could see clearly. He blinked his new eyes and began to dance and sing and jump and laugh. And the rest of us, we just all joined in, and it was a joyful dance, a glorious day, a thrilling divine party. Being with Jesus was a joyful time. There was another day. He was in a village market when a crowd of young boys who were playing hide and seek rushed around him. In a second, he joined the game and disappeared beneath a cart stacked high with beautiful red apples. They found him, pulled him out, and made him it for the next game, a position he took to with great eagerness. It seemed that half the day was spent playing child games while the village elders looked on. It was so funny, with disdain. No Messiah would waste time with hide and seek, one proud man whispered loudly. That stopped Jesus, just as he was winning a game of marbles. The only way you'll ever make it to heaven, this Messiah declared, is to become like these kids. Laughter, play, health, happiness, children, mothers, joy, forgiveness. These filled his days. Ministry, I heard him tell one of his disciples, happens best when you're smiling. Boo! That, of course, made the starch old lawyers split their seams with disgust. It was beautiful. Oh, those days near Jesus, they gave me hope. When he raised Lazarus from the dead, one of the craziest things I've ever seen happen. There were all kinds of journalists there because it had been told wide. Jesus is coming to see his best friend Lazarus who has died. And so everyone gathered around the tomb, including Mary, Martha, Simon, journalists from every agency you could imagine. And when Jesus talked to Martha, and Martha said, he's dead, he's gone, Jesus cried. Now, amazing. I didn't see him cry much at all. I saw him laugh. I saw him clap people on the back with joy. I saw him angry at people in the court of the temple. I saw him exhausted. I saw him enjoy good food. But I'd never seen him cry. And I started to reach for my notepad to write it down. Jesus cried. The next day in all of the news, the one thing that was at the top of every heading was, he wept. Jesus wept. It was so different. It was news. This is the man who knew how to laugh. And he also taught us that it's okay to cry. All the time I spent near Jesus, what I got was hope. No, this man would never overthrow Rome as everyone wanted the Messiah to do. But he sure was making the world a happier place. When he raised Lazarus from the dead, everyone danced for joy. He attended a feast with Simon, a leprous, old, sexually abusing Pharisee, and allowed a prostitute to drench him with spikenard and then wash his feet with her hair. One day he rode an unbroken donkey from Bethany to Jerusalem. That was hardly a week ago. And there were a mob of revelers waving palm branches while singing songs of rebellion and victory. And then he disappeared into the temple, they say. But now, Sabbath, the singers are all silent. The Messiah is dead, lying in the sepulchre of Arimathea. 100 bored Romans camped outside the sealed door. I wonder if by plan he is resting before taking up his life again on the third day. Wait, is that spikenard I smell? Go ahead. Drive the nails in my hands. Laugh at me where you stand. Go ahead. Say it isn't me. But the day will come when you will see. Because I'll rise again. Ain't no power on earth could tie me down. Yes, I'll rise again. Death can't keep me in the ground. I can hardly